Hey, this is Lady C. Welcome to The Critical Thought. In the upcoming episode, I'm going to be talking to LaQuita Marie, and she found our channel during COVID, doing some research about her own faith, and she realized that Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only people waking up to some truths about their religion. So, and we're going to be talking about her own personal experience in the Pentecostal holiness faith. And so I want to welcome LaQuita Marie. LaQuita, welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much, Lady C, for having me here on your channel. This is a pleasure because, yes, I started watching you back in 2020, and I can't believe that I'm here now actually talking about what I've discovered, the similarities between the Pentecostal holiness religion and the Jehovah Witness religion. I don't know if we can call them religions, but I just know that you all were a huge part of my critical thinking and getting to this point today. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, LaQuita, I remember seeing you in one of our live streams. And, that's when we really kind of connected when I saw you in our audience. And I did not know that you were a Pentecostal holiness. And so when we got started talking, I didn't realize that you were, doing some research about your religion and everything. So you want to give us a little bit of information about what you discovered about your faith that has you kind of looking, looking at your religion and saying, I got to get out of here.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I got to get out of here because, there were just so many double standards and I didn't realize it. I knew it, I felt it. But, once you see other people talking about their religious experiences, their church going or synagogue or what have you, you start to realize, wait a minute, is there always a double standard? How is this? And so watching your channel, of course, you never know who your audience is. And so you probably thought, ex-Jehovah Witnesses watch my channel or what have you. However, since all of the religions have double standards for women, for men, it seems like they have them for hierarchy and different things. But speaking from a woman's perspective, since a lot of these religions have woman biases and men biases, I think that's what really drew me in to see some of the similarities.
Okay. Now, is this the only religion that you've ever known? Is the Holiness Pentecostal?
Yes, absolutely. I was born in, that when, and I say born in because we don't typically say we were born in. We just say, oh, I was raised this or I was raised that. But yep, I was born in basically. And this is the only religion I've ever known. So I've actually no, let me change that because my husband was AME, African Methodist Episcopal. And so they had a different order of service. So they had a different set of rules. They were a little bit looser. There was more freedom. There were more freedoms, as far as going to dances or listening to certain types of music. And so when I got married to him, when I was dating him, I attended his church, but it wasn't really a conflict. It was still sort of like, well, you can still be Pentecostal and I'll still be AME. I didn't have to switch, he didn't have to switch, and there was no conflict.
Okay. So you're not having the issue with two people having different sets of religious belief systems because
No, that was not
because
really an
both of your
issue.
is it safe to say that like both of your religion both religions are celebrating holidays and birthdays, correct?
Correct. Both religions did celebrate a lot of the same things in that way. And I also saw the double standards over there too. So that's where I think it was fine because, as long as the low men were low on the totem pole in either religion, I guess it was okay. it was
Okay.
it was
How would
comfortable.
you compare your church services? Like, I know that from my experience with people I went to school with that were holiness, I thought that being a Jehovah's Witness, going to church or going to the Kingdom Hall was a whole lot to do. But I discovered that the holiness, they spend just as much time in church as Jehovah's Witnesses. So when you were looking at your husband, his faith versus yours, which one spent more time at church?
Well, I'll give the comparison of his church and your church and my church because when I started following your channel, that's when I realized that you all went to church just as much, if not more, than the Pentecostal holiness. Like we were tied. It's like we were racing to see who could be in the church more often or the Kingdom Hall. Whereas his church, they just had certain days because we went to church Wednesday, Friday, and all day Sunday. Like those were our absolute days. Even though they had certain church days, it was mainly just Sunday. And even the church that he was going to, it was every other Sunday. And there was no real stickler to you absolutely being there. Whereas I know in the Pentecostal Holiness Church, if you didn't show up, you got dogged out. People were talking about you. And I've heard you all say something similar. You know, y'all were looking for people to be in the seats and y'all talked about them if they weren't in the seats. I've heard JT, you know, he's always talking about people getting dogged. And getting dogged is a very similar thing that I experienced growing up in the Pentecostal Holiness Church.
Okay. Now, the difference between the Pentecostal and Jehovah's Witnesses on Sunday, we're not at church all day Sunday. So we have like the a 45-minute watchtower discussion and 45-minute public talk. And then, of course, there's songs in between would make it a whole 2 hours. And then Jehovah's Witnesses will be expected to go out doing proselytizing, knocking on doors the other part of the time. Well, a lot of people didn't always do that either, unless you were a regular pioneer or somebody that had to get a hour requirement. So we didn't expect to be in church all day. So that's a little bit different than the holiness.
You know, I guess that's why they called our church service because our service was all in that building. Whereas we started out with Sunday school for an hour on Sunday mornings. We then went into a morning service that was around 2 hours. But the Pentecostal Holiness Church is known for quote unquote letting the Holy Spirit have its way. So that meant that you could be in church for 3 hours, 4 hours. I have been in church so long at one service that everyone had left. Everyone except for my family, because my dad was a pastor, so our family was not leaving. But it was an evening service, it was a revival. And that's another thing I didn't mention. We can get into that if you'd like to. But we would be in church morning service, night service, sometimes afternoon service. This particular service was a revival service. So since it was in the evening on a weeknight, people had to go to work the next morning. Children had to go to school. But since we were the pastor's children, well, we just kind of had to stick it out because somebody had to lock the church up after that guest pastor left. So we were there 4 or 5 hours. I don't even remember, but I do remember doing homework in church and just being there. You never knew how long you were going to be there.
Wow. And so you know what? You touched on something because you said that you were a pastor's daughter. And so, you always hear about those stories where how difficult that was. So you want to talk a little bit about what that was like in the community? How were people looking at you? What were they expecting you to be like when you were, out at, away from church or whatever? How was that life experience for you?
I think this is where some of that double standard comes in because inside the church, you were treated out. Now, I wouldn't say better, but you were kind of treated better because, everybody loved the pastor. They wanted to, make him happy and treat his family nicely and things like that. So we were definitely, I would say I had a lot of freedoms in the church. So, if you wanted to play an instrument, then you could. As a pastor's child, you had more playtime, literally. So I play several instruments, and it was kind of because of that. On the other hand, out in the community, the preacher's kid was known as the bad kid, the one that was going to push the limit. So this is where the double standard comes in because, we were the ones that were, I guess they expected us to be good. And when we acted like them, they saw us as, oh, y'all are wilding out. Y'all are doing the most. You're kind of extra. And I'm like, well, we're doing the same things as you. And then, of course, you did have some of those that kind of went the extra mile. But there was definitely the double standard from that perspective. How we were treated in the community. A lot of people were preachers' kids. And so, if nothing else, people teased us about just always being in church. But outside of that, it was, yeah, they knew that the preacher's kids were the worst ones.
But you know what? And just talking to you, a lot of times, what I heard about the preacher's kids growing up is the fact that they came from strict households. Like some of my family members that I know that were in that faith, and how because the household was so strict, have you heard about the sponge or the rubber band? If you hold them in so tight and they finally let it go, they just spring, spring out of control.
Right.
And but if they had that more balanced upbringing, then they didn't have these issues. So was your father very strict on you and your siblings?
No, not in our household. And I didn't, I felt like the religion itself was the rubber band that was pulling on all of us. And not necessarily, because I have had a very loving father who was a great person. And a lot of the men in the church, the ones that were straight up okay, they were loving, they were supportive of their families. And when I say straight up okay, that's where the double standard came in because I saw some of these sneaking deacons that were in the club on Saturday night and in the church on Sunday morning. And it's like, well, wait a minute. And it was okay, but you would not be a woman and be anywhere, and get caught out there. Number one, you might get preached about. They would just about say your name in the sermon, if you were a woman. The men, they got away with so many things, fathered children and secret love affairs and all that stuff. So that's where I feel like the religion was the one putting the stronghold on us. But in the individual families, it was sort of like everybody had their own individual stuff, whether it was a pastor or not. I think people expected the pastor's family to do better and be better, but my father didn't enforce it, and I didn't see all the preachers enforcing it on their families either. They were tender, they were loving.
Well, in the contrast to the holiness, the Jehovah's Witnesses were much, much different because, no elder or ministerial servant or even a brother who doesn't have a privilege is going to be out, doing what you say they're doing, fathering kids out of wedlock and or just extramarital affairs and things without being disciplined by the congregation. And I think that's what made it very hard for. And I mean, who wants that? No, I mean, nobody wants to be
Right,
part of that either. I'm not
right.
saying that that's a bad thing to discipline people, but I'm saying that you're not gonna hold a position at the Kingdom Hall doing that. So listening to you, it sounds like you're saying you're in a religion, but nobody's being held to any standards.
And I think that's where the crack in my foundation was because early on as a child, I saw the double standards where all the drummers, because the churches would fellowship with one another. This was a big thing. That's where the afternoon service came in on Sundays. You go to morning service, you might travel to another service at 3 o'clock or in the afternoon. And that church might be late because the Holy Spirit took their service too long. But when you got there, you always had the different drummers, and the drummers were always, I don't know what it was, but they almost always had a child in the church by a girlfriend. Now, if you get a girl pregnant, you can still play drums, or it might have been the keyboard player, but you can still direct the choir or whatever if you're a man. If you're a woman and you were directing the choir and you were the one that got pregnant, you had to sit down. And I saw that. I saw like, wait a minute. Well, how is it that the mama can't usher anymore, but the dad can still serve in his position? And it was that double standard that really made me from a child, even though I was born in, I could never fully embrace this. And then it was so easy once we got to 2020 and I had a lot of time to find channels like your channel. And I said, wow, there are so many similarities. And then it really just made so much sense. And to peel back those layers and just to be honest and live in my truth and say I can be a spiritual person and I can be a godly person, I can be a loving person. I don't have to necessarily stick to this religion anymore. Pentecostal holiness ain't it.
Well, it's a very interesting thing that we're having this discussion because as I'm talking about the standards that Jehovah's Witnesses hold their members to, if you wouldn't have had the internet and you were looking at your religion thinking, "Oh my goodness, there's no standards, there's people are getting away with doing things that the Bible talks against." And then all of a sudden, two Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door and they're telling you all of these truths, this paradise earth that you can live in, how all these people come together at the Kingdom Hall, and how your life can be so much better than what it is at your current church. I mean, they would have just been breaking it down. And you would have been thinking, oh, this is wonderful. I have found the perfect place to be, right? But then, that's, thank goodness that didn't happen, because that's what happens to so many people.
Mm.
I mean, it happens to so many people where they end up getting caught up in the Jehovah's Witness religion because of what you just got through describing. Because they make it seem like we're the place you need to be. But then you come to find out that Jehovah's Witnesses, they got their own set of problems, just like any other church, you
Well,
know?
you know what? Exactly. Okay, so something that you just said, that was another crack in my foundation. That the Jehovah Witnesses, this is something that I heard you all talk about a lot, you and JT, on your different channels. This religion is the one. Your religion was telling you that. Growing up, I heard that so much. That was a part of what made me say, it can't be. Come on now. There can't, this cannot be the only way with so many people in the world doing so many different things. You mean to tell me we're the only handful that have the absolute correct? And so that was a part of it from from me being a child, coming up thinking, having those doubts, having those questions. We could ask questions, but they always had an answer. They always had a scripture to show us. And so, the other thing is it was all faith based. You just believe, just believe. And I also remember thinking that was another part. Like, so if I just believe, then this is all true. And if I don't believe it's not true, like then what? So it was there were just too many things that didn't balance. How is it that if I don't believe, I'm going to hell, damnation, eternal damnation, but if I do believe, I make it in? What about the people that didn't even know about this, to believe or not to believe? Those were some of the questions we would have. They always had an answer, but it never really made good sense. So just what you said about, this is the place, this is the only place, but then realizing even in your own religion that there were issues, those were some of the cracks in my foundation that said, yep, that's another double standard.
Yeah. And I mean, because like with the Jehovah's Witnesses, we definitely had a path where we were going. And in that religion, it was two paths. You were either going to heaven, or you were going to be living on a paradise earth. And for most of the people, it's the paradise earth. And so what really keeps them there is that promise of
Right,
living forever in paradise. So if you had a loved one that died in death, a pre if you had a loved one that had previously died, and you were looking forward to seeing them in the resurrection, this is how my mother became a Jehovah's Witness, is because of that promise.
right,
Or if you yourself is sick and you're looking forward to being resurrected and things like that. So that's the driving part about membership in this religion, because even when we left the organization, that's what came up from
right.
the people that when we had left. It was like, oh, they're going to be destroyed. They're going to die. They're not going to be in paradise.
Yes.
And
That
so that was the driving point behind Jehovah's Witnesses. So what is the driving part in your religion? What were you guys looking forward to?
well, it's the same thing. The only difference in the end game being a paradise earth was that ours was in heaven. But there were only two paths, and it was either hell, damnation, and burning in hellfire, being tortured forever, or going to heaven, ascending to heaven to live eternally with your loved ones that you had known in your past life. So it was a very similar story to the Jehovah Witness story. That there was this paradise at the end. The only difference is ours was in heaven. That was the driving force for membership. It wasn't have a good life right here on earth. I never realized that, wait a minute, you are supposed to enjoy this life, until I let go of so much of that. And I said, well, we're here. What are we supposed to do while we're here other than preparing for later? You can enjoy this time. You can enjoy this life. And that doesn't have to involve drinking and drugs. They would give the extreme of things that could go wrong. They never said, enjoy the sunshine, sit in a tree. Those are the water is here. Anytime you see a body of water, you can sit and enjoy the sounds and just look at the water and enjoy the ducks and enjoy whatever comes to that area. You can pull up in your driveway and watch the birds. I didn't know those were parts of enjoying life uh, in its abundance and its fullness, because that was not a part of the religion. It was just a part of getting ready to enjoy the end.
And I think that we all speak the same language when it comes to that because, like I heard you mention earlier about how your husband went to church every other week. You're in church every Sunday, all day. Pastor's family there to midnight, whatever it is you I don't know if it was midnight or not, but you're there doing homework. You got to go to work the next day, kids got to go to school, but your whole life is just centered on being at church. But then you just got through talking about how there's so many other things that you could be involved in. Like if people are really um, admiring the creation or the creator and what the creator, created for us to enjoy on this earth. And my whole thing is the only thing y'all can do is sit in this building all day. I think that if you really wanted to marvel at the creation, at what we have here, what's wrong with the sunset? What's wrong with going sailing on the weekend?
Right.
Mountain climbing, skiing, and enjoying the creation, the things that was put here. Because
Right.
if the creator didn't intend for us to enjoy these things, then we wouldn't have a sunset, a sunrise, or all of the other things that we can enjoy in life. But when we belong to these different organized groups that tell us that we have to be at this place every day at the same time every day next week, at the same place every week, then what are we getting? We're not even enjoying anything because you're not even leaving the four walls of the building, you
Well,
know?
yes, and I'd like to make this final point because this goes right back to, in addition to what you're saying, it definitely adds to that, but it also goes right back to the double standard, because we were told to prepare for the end. Just worry about the next life when you're going to see your loved ones, and we were told to do all the service in this building. Pretty much, all the service was in this building. Of course, you were supposed to go out and let your light shine. However, we were also told that in the Pentecostal Holiness Church, if you have a job that keeps you from going to Wednesday night or Friday night or Sunday, those regular service days, then try not to take that job. Let your boss know you can't work those days. Now, this would hinder people's income. So you don't even have extra income to go sailing on the weekend or to go for a hike or any of these things that God created. And you can't really enjoy them. The only way you can enjoy them is getting in the car on your way to the service, to do service in the building. We did not have a lot of outreach. We did not have to knock on doors. We would be assumed that just by being a Christian, your light would shine. However, a lot of times people were miserable, so we would complain a lot because we didn't have a lot, because we were also expected to tithe a lot and give. So, in addition to your 10% of all your income that you tithe, they also had different things that would come up and that you would all of a sudden have to pay for or help with, and all of those things. And so, that was another double standard. I just wanted to point that out, that how can I give when I'm giving from this empty pot? I need to be filled up first. Let me go get an education. Let me go work 6 days a week if that's what it means, and get my investments together so that my money can make money. And now I can give more freely. But that was where we were. So I just wanted to actually make that final point as well.
That's very interesting that you're saying that because, like, my question to you would be, um, do your ministers work full-time jobs? Like, did your dad work? He was a pastor, but did he work a job outside the church?
A lot of the ministers did work full-time jobs because a lot of the ministers and the preachers were simply called. You could just say that you were called to service, you were called to be a preacher, and you could just start a church. And I've seen a lot of churches split up over that. You would have members say, well, I've been called to be a preacher. They had a full-time job before, and now that they're going out to start a new church, they still had to keep their full-time jobs. And there was no infrastructure to support you going out to be this person that you claim to be. However, because we were a faith-based organization, People just believed that you were called and they just followed you and they said, oh, so and so's a preacher now. Thank God. And, they just went along with it.
Amazing. So then you're saying that you're not really your religion didn't really encourage higher education? Because you're saying that they're telling you not to work a job if you can't get to your church services. So how did that play out with
Yeah.
education?
You know what? It was sort of like a free for all, so that you did have there was no limitation on your education as far as they would say, "Oh, get your education," but then they couldn't make sense of it. That well, how are you going to get your education if you are doing all this service here in the church? If you're saying, hey, I need you to play for the revival, we have a 7-day revival, you play drums or you play piano or you're in the choir, we need the choir singing every single night, skip some classes. You know what I mean? It was sort of like that was the sentiment. So they didn't mind you going to school, but you just needed to work all of that around church.
Well, you know what? There's your answer. There is your answer. So, in other words, instead of them being like Jehovah's Witnesses and saying we don't encourage going to higher education, and they only put people on the platform to give experiences about how they did more stuff for the Watchtower, your religion didn't say don't go to church. I mean, your religion didn't say don't go to school either. They just made you so busy that how could you participate in higher education? So they're
Exactly.
so by example, they're kind of showing you what they really want you to do.
Exactly, exactly. You're right. And so that's where a lot of people did have a lot of service jobs. I myself have been a nurse for a long time, and it's a service job. I thought I was getting into a different profession, just not realizing. And then once I realized that, oh, I'm just another, worker bee, I accept it. I love it. However, it's not a place where you're going to work smarter, not harder, unless you use your own critical thinking skills and figure a way out to do so.
It's amazing how the differences of the two religions are, but at the same time, both the Pentecostal religion and Jehovah's Witnesses, they take up an extreme amount of time from their members,
Right.
causing you to do so much for them that you lack self-awareness in how you can take care of yourself. Now, you mentioned tithing. What is that, what do your tithes pay for in your religion?
So your tithes pay for the church building and the bills of the church, and it also helps the pastor. So some of that would go to the pastor. So this is where, if everybody's giving 10%, because we don't have an institution or a higher place to necessarily support the building or support that particular church, then churches can go under. So this is why we would have a lot of storefront churches. A lot of people would have these churches in their homes. Um, you would have all of these little ragtag churches and little sectors. And it's like, come on, y'all, stop with this 7 members over here and 7 members there. Let's pull everybody together so that all the tithes can go to a larger purpose, because the tithes were supposed to go to helping the sick and the needy as well. But there was never enough to go around, because a lot of times the Pentecostal holiness is famous for having smaller congregations, you know. So, and you of course you always have your outliers that are going to be, larger congregations and whatnot. And those are the ones that did more in the community. They didn't just pay the church bills. But yes, to answer your question.
Well, that's interesting. It must be kind of stressful for the pastor because he never knows when he's going to come to a service where someone is splitting his congregation.
That's exactly right. People would come and go all the time from one congregation to another, because, oh, well, my sister goes over here. And again, that's where you would just hear people talking about them, dogging them out. And that's where I would say to myself, they've told us how many times God is love, is in the Bible, but that does not sound like a loving statement. That, we're always talking about who's doing what. And in a negative light, these aren't good comments when you have all these churches splitting and people coming and going, and the pastor, like you're saying, not really being able to count on any specific set of income, so that a lot of the pastors, part of their personal salary went towards supporting the church.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. They got creative. I know my father was able to burn our church mortgage, but he did it in a lot of creative ways. Whereas he would hold a thrift store on Saturdays. He would pull everything out. People would come through, buy things, and he would deposit that money into the bank. I guess he was paying down the bills, and I guess the finance committee was helping with that, But I know we burned our mortgage. However, a lot of times especially in those early days, it wasn't always like that. And listening to them talk about different churches, I overheard that. Yes, their personal money was helping the church. Or sometimes the pastors would say it themselves. The pastors would tell the people, y'all got to give more because I'm doing this and y'all need to do that.
Wow. Did you guys ever have any guest pastors that came to your church? And if you did, what was their message? What was the sermon like?
Well, somehow everybody did have the same message. Everybody did have the same sermon. They were pretty much hellfire preachers, damnation, so that they all preached that same, stay in this religion so that you can make it to heaven. Do right so that you could get into heaven. And a lot of times they would preach from some of the same scriptures. So you heard a lot of the same sermons and whatnot. And there was a lot of fellowship as well between churches. So that 3 o'clock service on a Sunday that I was talking about, a lot of times that was a church coming to your church or you going to fellowship with another church. And that's also what the revivals were for. We had revivals all throughout the year, 3 night revivals, 4 night revivals, 7 night revivals, month-long revivals. And
Really?
that was where, you would go to different churches to their revivals. Yeah, it was intense. That's why I just joked that I went to church 64 to 92 days a week growing up.
Oh my god. So that had to be really hard for kids because when you're trying to participate in extracurricular activities, maybe playing sports, being in a band, playing, just doing extracurricular things, did you find that you were excluded from those things because of your affiliation with your church and all the activities associated with it?
I did feel excluded from extracurricular activities, and I think this is where the strictness comes in with the pastor's children. Whereas the pastor wasn't necessarily strict with his own family. However, his family, like the children, knew, well, I have to go to church on these days. So there's no point for me to sign up for track or volleyball or the band. So, like for me, I played in the band, but when I got to high school, I quit because I was thinking I can't do marching band because I can't go there on Friday nights. That's a church night. And so, yes, there were limitations. And then you had members who just, yeah, they let their kids go ahead and participate in extracurricular activities and they weren't inhibited. So that was kind of up to the discretion of the family. But I do feel like that's where the limitations on the pastor's family was. And that's another that double standard, where this is how the pastor's family is seen. Y'all better be at all the services.
Oh, wow. What about the dress code?
The dress code, oh my goodness, it was all over the place, but it was strict. So the dress code was strict from the perspective of my personal church and some of the churches in that area. We had to wear skirts. We could not wear pants. We could not wear earrings or makeup, so we couldn't wear lipstick. But then another church that we would fellowship with, several other churches in North Carolina, I remember they could not wear wedding rings. They could not wear watches. We could wear wedding rings and watches. They could not wear red shoes, or maybe it was white shoes. It could have been red and white shoes. Um, and so that's what I mean by the dress code was all over the place. Within the same religion, that was another part of that double standard. I said, oh, well, is this even serious? How serious is this? Is it real? It just made me question things.
Amazing. What about the, overall happiness? Would you say that people were exhibiting happiness, or they just is it all a front? Making you come there and you're like, see all these people smiling faces, and then, of course, you hear the underling talking about how miserable they were. How was the morale in your church?
I would say the morale was really great. People were genuinely loving. And I think also people were happy in the struggle. People at the bottom, they say like misery loves company, right? And so I think that's a part of it. So everybody kind of knew that they were all limited in a way. And so there was some genuine happiness amongst the people. However, there was also a lot of, I guess the church would call it backbiting, but there was a lot of that, just talking behind people's backs. And it was sort of like that was just kind of to be expected as well. You just kind of got the updates on people because, oh, now you know who to pray for. That was the excuse for having it, for talking about people, and dogging people out. Oh, so we got to pray about this. And well, let's just hope that, Jesus will be a fence. But the general morale was definitely, there was a sense of, oh, I hope we make it. The struggle is almost over. That was the general sentiment, and you were happy in that space.
So, like we talked before, it was like there's no reason that we can have enjoyment now because all these religions seem to be pointing to some future date when people would be able to enjoy their lives. So, you're saying the same thing for your religion as well?
Absolutely. There's the same hope for tomorrow. That thread was going throughout for us to not be happy now, not work on today and think about, like, it wasn't wake up and think about your affirmations like I am wonderful, I am alive, I am breathing. It wasn't that. It was, whoo, thank God I woke up another day on this side, sort of like I'm here, but it's a bother to be here. So I should never be too happy to be here. I don't know. It was just confusing.
Well, so what is your major crack in your foundation then? So because you were born in this religion, you had an opportunity to see another religion through your husband, the AME, but now you're looking at, another a side of something else. What was the major crack in your foundation about your religion and what you thought was too much to continue with this faith?
I would say the major crack, oh my goodness. I just felt like it was early on, just seeing something different than what I was hearing. There was one thing being preached across the pulpit, there was one thing being preached in the Bible studies and the Sunday schools about all this love. And I saw so many opposites. I just saw so many opposites. I like the way people where everybody got a beating, like there was no such thing as, and I guess that was also the culture of the times. But I remember thinking like, wow, so the people at church are okay with folks beating their children with extension cords. We didn't get beat with extension cords in my home, but that was no normal. So, those sorts of things, they just didn't add up early on in life. And there was, so I feel like that crack just got wider and it spread as I got older and saw more and experienced more.
So, do you believe that the way people try to put us in boxes is actually controlling? So, in other words, if you stop going to your church and then someone says, "Where are you going now?" Because at that point, you're going to get you're being judged. The
Right.
the next answer you give is going to judge what your actions are, right? So, do you think that organized religion is a way to control people to make them feel so that you can be judged in a manner that's not worthy or not? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, organized religion is definitely a way. It's one of the traps, one of the major traps for us to be in a position of being judged or not. For us to feel like we have to live a certain way, live up to certain standards. And there are lots of entrapments out here. When we go to school, it's an institution for us to be judged on. Are you smart? Are you not smart? Are you just as smart? So the same thing, like in the Pentecostal holiness religion, it was, how saved are you? Everybody was trying to be more saved than the last person. And so it's like there are all these demands put on you to constantly live to be this certain person. And I definitely would say that all of those limitations are just entrapments, whereas they don't really speak to the core of what we should be doing. It's just about, oh, let me just entrap you all so that you can service this institution, and then it can funnel up to some people somewhere, but it's a trap house.
Oh my goodness. When you said that about the different levels and how people are trying to be more saved than the other one, it kind of brought me back to think about that game called Candy Crush. And
Yes.
in Candy Crush, it's like you get to the level, you continue up these levels, but the levels never stop.
Right.
To the point where this is pre-COVID. I mean, way before COVID started. I had to give that game up, because it was like I can't keep going to these different levels. And I got to the point that I was actually paying the money to get
Yep.
me to my next level,
Yep.
50 cent here and there. So it sounds to me like your religion sound like trying to reach those levels in Candy Crush, right? You
Yes,
can
there
never
was
do
no
enough,
end.
right?
Yes, there was no end. Like you were told to be a better and better Christian, but and to be more and more saved, but no one told you that there was not an end in sight. And actually your end in sight was heaven. That's what, but they didn't say, but there's really no best until you get to heaven. Like you can finally get to here and you can just maintain at that level until you get to heaven. Nope. It was like the Candy Crush version of religion. Yeah, just do better, just be better. And meanwhile, there was that dichotomy of, backbiting, lying, backstabbing, getting people pregnant in other relationships. Yes, all over the place.
It's rough all the way around, right? But I mean, think about it though. It's not like when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses, it was like I could never do enough. Because during the time that I was in that religion, they were putting out like 4 magazines a month. Like 2 Watchtowers were being published each month, 2 Awake magazines was being published. We had a book that we had to study for our book study. Then we had to also study the Watchtower. And then we had a theocratic school and service meeting at the time where we had to prepare for all of that, right? So this was every week, and we went out the house for 3 days a week, and we had prescribed um books that we had to read, and we had a schedule that we had to follow. And then we had to go knocking on doors on our other time off, whatever time we could fit in our schedule, with
Right.
our full-time jobs. And they were always asking us to work part-time, or encouraging part-time. If you were a female, they definitely didn't want you working if you were married. But I mean,
Right.
they didn't tell you to quit your job, but people would look at you like she don't need to be working a job because her husband is working. And so you start
Right.
getting judged and everything like that,
Yep.
right? But I remember this one sister that I knew, and she said the schedule of the Jehovah's Witnesses was so bad that she said, "When can I have a glass of wine?" Because it was like one of the things about studying the Bible is you're not going to be studying under the influence of a drink, right?
Right.
But she was making a joke, and she said that we had so much to do in this religion that she couldn't even have a glass of wine, because she was always studying and doing
It was not
something with this religion, and it was
right.
terrible. Just
And
and like and somebody was like saying they didn't even know if they felt comfortable or being able to read a secular book. They had so much Watchtower stuff to read.
that was a very similar situation when you say that you all had so much Watchtower to read that you couldn't really have time for anything else. The things that we consumed were definitely limited, so they tried to tell us don't watch certain shows. You definitely couldn't drink or smoke. I think most religions say don't drink or smoke simply because you're ruining your body. They saw it that way. They didn't see food as a way to ruin our bodies, and that's how most of us went down in this religion because the food, and also the food knowledge that we have today wasn't there then. So maybe now they're incorporating that into their sermons. I don't know, because luckily I am not there
Oh
to
my
find out
goodness.
what
So
the next
so
level of.
oh, say that again.
I was just saying, luckily I'm not there to find out what the next level of entrapment, because it went from we couldn't wear pants to we can now wear pants. We couldn't do things, and now we can. So yeah, so maybe now they've added food. Like I'm sure they still can't smoke or drink. And maybe now they're saying, a lot of churches have incorporated the Daniel fast. We didn't even have the Daniel fast back then. Now, and so maybe food is another way, new way that they're adding control there to keep the people in. Because there's always, like you were saying earlier, the membership always has to have a drive. Like, why are we here? And so it's always, oh, you want to better yourself. How do you want to better yourself? Now that we got rid of all the clothes restrictions, oh, well, you can come better yourself spiritually, and then physically we do the Daniel fast once a year, so you're going to get healthy in January. And then you'll go back to eating everything, and then we'll pray about those sicknesses that you brought back on yourself.
Oh my goodness. So that means that I didn't realize that you guys could not drink. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses, you would be excommunicated if you were a known alcoholic. So drinking was in moderation. Smoking, you would get excommunicated for that. So we couldn't do that. So you guys were not allowed to drink or smoke.
Or do drugs, correct.
Well,
No
the
drugs.
same here. No drugs for
And
witnesses. Yeah. What about shunning? So like you're not going to your church anymore, and do you still maintain your friendships from the church that you attended?
oh, absolutely, you maintain your friendships. We do not have, I will say that we don't have shunning. We don't have anything like, we just have people getting dogged out, getting talked about, and they might just get out or talked about because, well, she knew we needed her on in the choir and then she left. She knew she was always serving on this committee and she left, or he left. We needed him to play whatever. So there was not necessarily shunning, just dogging out people, talking about people. But when you saw them, because again, there was a lot of fellowship between the churches, that was also what was keeping you all in that institution, because you would still see each other. And of course, once you come together in a service, you're supposed to show love. And so even though you just talked about them, hey, so and so, how you doing? You're just right back to smiles and everything. But there's no official shunning, and you still talk to those people whether you're in the church or out of the church. If you see them in the street or at work, yeah, you talk to them. It's no problem at all.
But my thing is not so much just saying hi or bye. My question is, when you stop attending church, are you invited to get-togethers and social functions?
You are absolutely still invited to social functions, get-togethers, even after you've left the church, because there's always the hope that you're going to come back. Everybody's always trying to increase their membership, and so now, if anything, it's like, oh yeah, let's fellowship with this person. Let's talk to them and invite them to the baby shower or the holiday, whatever, because then we're working on recruiting. You know,
So then, since you've been gone from your church, have you fellowshipped with anybody?
Yeah, I still see a lot of the same people. Definitely, I still see them at different functions or what have you. And there's no love lost. We say hello, we hug each other. My parents' church was the last church I was attending, and the pastor there. I've seen him. I've talked to his wife. I've seen other people from the church, and so yeah, you still engage with them just as you normally would. I will say that the Pentecostal Holiness Church, we didn't really have that shunning part. The only time you had a difference is when someone was sat down for doing something, that
Okay.
was more like adultery or what have you.
Well, you know what? The way you explained it and how they um drift away, the way you explained how they break away with different churches, for all they know, you could just be at one of those splinter churches too. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly,
So, because like the
exactly.
Jehovah's Witnesses, if you was to leave the Kingdom Hall and go to another Kingdom Hall, they're gonna write the other Kingdom Hall for your publisher record card, and then they're gonna send a letter of introduction, and so it's all done formally, and so
Right.
that's how they're able to keep track of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and so that would be a little bit different then for your group.
Correct. That would be different. I think that's where the more extreme nature of the Jehovah Witnesses came in, because we
Mhm.
were not being tracked to that degree. We were not tracking each other. And keep in mind that a lot of people were simply called to the ministry. So there was no formal organization either to keep all of those things cohesive as far as who's going to which church, what's the name of this church, which is now splintered off. Because, of course, you could just name your church whatever you wanted to name it. I could name my church Superfood Parents if I'd like. You could name your church Lady C's House of Ministry. You could just name your church. And so that's where, there wasn't that tracking and that strictness. And I think that's why we also did not have that shunning either, because really the hope was that good. Leave their church and come over here.
So it's a little bit so you got stress, but you don't have stress because you got stress where you got these revivals you got to go to. You got to go to these sermons, these meetings, and all that. but at the same time, you can splinter off and go over here if you want to, right?
Absolutely. And of course, anytime there's a service, there is an offering plate. So, of course, you have your tithes that you're paying 10%. But even outside of your tithes, anytime you go to a church service, whether it was that Wednesday night, Friday night, Sunday morning, or just a revival. So, if you're going to a 7 night revival, now you've given money all 7 nights at the revival, and plus whatever you were doing on those Sunday services. So you're giving money on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Sunday afternoon. There's always money being given. And it was like a bid, the offering time. So, where they would say, our goal is this. And people would start producing that money.
Really? So for Jehovah's Witnesses, it was about how much time you were spending. But what you're saying with your church, it was how much money you were giving.
There's always the talk of giving your time, talents, and treasures. So they didn't just want your time. They didn't just want your talents, meaning you can play an instrument, you can sing, you can usher. They didn't just want your treasures or your money. They wanted all three. That's what was preached to us. Give of your time, your talents, and your treasures, and your reward will be great in heaven. And so, yeah, you just work like a dog, I guess, to figure it all out. And that's what I meant by you're smiling in the misery, because that's a heavy demand on people, to really be, because you think about it, if you're singing in the choir, then you have to go to choir rehearsal. You don't just get up there on Sunday and just sing, you have to rehearse. So whether that's 1 or 2 nights a week, so if you're rehearsing one night, plus you're still in church Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday, now you've been in church 4 days. So it's intense in those ways. Time, talents, and treasures is what they would demand.
You're making a lot of sense, and I'm hearing exactly what you're saying because it sounds like your schedule is a little bit more relentless than Jehovah's Witnesses because we don't have choir. We didn't when I was a Jehovah's Witness, they didn't have a choir.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we didn't
Right.
have all the extra stuff. So I can see
And
where the burdens are definitely there. There's a lot of burden there. Yeah.
def- definitely a lot of burdens on you. And then, of course, you have your different committees because, like I said, if you usher, you might have usher board meetings. If you have people that rotate to clean the church. So, I mean, there's just all these different ways that you can serve. And like I was talking earlier about the finance committee, we had people that were actively working on the goodwill of their own time to make sure that if they were an accountant in their professional lives, they were giving accounting services to the church. If they were working at the shipyard as a welder or as a builder, then yes, if there was a repair, hey, brother so and so, can you come do this? And brother so and so might actually pay for the supplies and do the repair because now he's giving time, talent, and treasure all at once. So yeah, there were demands, and people met them, and
That's
they.
a heavy burden right there,
Mhm.
to do all that. Yeah, that's a lot. And then everything is about a reward. It's like you're doing things because you're gonna get something in the end. And it that can take a toll on people because it's almost like you never have a chance to sit down. Like one
Right.
of the things I always stated when I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses is my biggest thing I hated was on Saturday, I could not sit at home and have a cup of coffee. That's all I wanted to do. I
Right.
wanted to be able to after I got up early every week, Monday through Friday, I wanted to be able to get up in the morning, have my bacon and eggs, have a cup of coffee, and kind of meditate a little bit over what I did that week and just kind of chill out. But as a
Right.
Jehovah's Witness, you were expected to be knocking at your first door at 10 a.m., which meant that you had to get up, get your sermon ready, that what you're going to talk your presentation at the door that you're going to be giving that morning, and be ready to be there at the door. And I remember so many times smelling somebody else's bacon cooking, the bacon that I couldn't fry and have at home. And I know
Right.
people that don't eat pork, they're gonna be saying something about me and my bacon, but I can eat turkey bacon.
But
You
you
know,
know what?
I
Either
eat
way,
chicken bacon. But I'm just saying, but I'm just telling you.
the coffee, right? Because the whole point is that when you're knocking at somebody else's door and you smell the coffee, because we had a similar situation with us, whereas we're going to school knowing that okay, I have to wear a dress, But wait, so that also means how am I going to run track if I'm a fast runner or if I'm a long distance runner? I can't even indulge in that because you are not going to be on the track wearing a skirt. You are not going to be on the volleyball court, you know. And so when you see your friends getting ready for their sports and things like that, those things weigh on you. So, like you're saying, for you, it might have been that cup of coffee. For you, it might have been that smell of bacon. For us, it might have been, wow, look at what other people are doing. On the weekends, we see them getting their boat ready to go enjoy the lake that God has made. You know, they're going fishing
Yeah,
or they're just going out on the lake. And what are we doing? Frying chicken so that we can have something to eat while we're all day in church on Sunday. We can have food in between the services. We're getting our hair done for Sunday. We're getting our clothes washed and ready.
is there anything else that you would like to say that you haven't stated to our listening audience?
You know, I think I've already stated this, and I just want to restate it because there's still a lack of it. Um, love, love. You know, I'd like for if any of you are fans of Stevie Wonder or Marvin Gaye, just look at their lyrics. Luther Vandross. Don't even listen to the music. Just look at the lyrics. The Funkadelics. I don't know that they have as much love in their music, but just look at those artists in the '70s, and you will find there's a lot of love. You know, just a lot of playfulness. Not adultery, but just love, like genuine love for each other and for your space that you're in, meaning your home, you know, taking care of your home, taking care of your yard, taking care of your neighbors. So definitely, I would say extend love.
That is so true. And I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience because it's always nice talking to other people about their experiences because so many times we just think that we have something that we're going through and that our situation is worse than someone else. But then when you start comparing notes, it's almost like it's similar in terms of your time, like you said, your talent and your finances.
Thank you so much for having me, Lady C. Thank you for this opportunity. I've had a wonderful time and I look forward to continue watching your channels. Thank you again.
You're welcome. All right, this has been Lady C. Thank you so much for being in my audience, and I'll see you on the next episode.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.